Good afternoon. Hope everybody is having a good time so far here with all the interesting sessions going on around. So my name is Namitha. I work as a web authentication engineer at a global financial services company. My work mainly revolves around enabling single sign-on for applications using standards like SAML, Auth, OpenID Connect, and also enabling access management for these applications. So I'm here today to talk about the solution that we have to enable the access management for federated third-party SaaS applications. So to give you a little background about the size of our enterprise, to give you a context of the extent of impact this project has had for the company. We are a global financial services company, and we have a workforce population of more than 100,000 workers spread over 40 plus countries all over the world. And we have federation partnerships with more than 500 SaaS vendors. By federated applications, I mean the external third-party SaaS applications that our workforce interacts with and we have partnerships with, and we have enabled single sign-on for all of these applications using SAML. Also, this number of SaaS partnerships is growing exponentially over the past couple of years. There has been a staggering increase, and we see almost 10 new connections, 10 new SaaS partnerships being added every month. And hence, this deployment is of significant importance for the firm. So what is the big deal about the access management for federated applications, right? As we all agree, authentication and authorization are the basic building blocks of web application security. Let it be an internal application or a SaaS application, it does not matter. So in an ideal world, an identity provider would provide the authentication of the user, and the authorization framework must be able to fetch the entitlements for those users. And using these identity details as well as the entitlement details, the application must be able to make the authorization decision, either to allow the user to access the application or deny access. So all this works perfectly fine as expected for an application that is hosted inside the enterprise network and that can leverage all of the goodies that the enterprise can provide, like the authorization framework. But what about the federated applications? These federated applications are situated outside of the enterprise network, and they are managed by an external entity. They cannot exactly take advantage of the authorization framework that the enterprise provides. So what happens to those applications? So we have an industry standard SCIM that is supposed to help us with this exact use case. SCIM is a standard that enables provisioning and deprovisioning of the users on the SaaS provider side, and also enables the access management for such users. But however, the problem is, we conducted a survey of all of our SaaS providers that we have partnerships with, and we found that majority of these SaaS providers have not even adopted SCIM yet. So yes, there is a standard in place, but how far is this adoption? I should say it's less than 10% of our SaaS providers that have adopted this form. So that have adopted the standard, so this was not a viable solution for the problem that we had. So this leads us to the problem statement. How do we manage user access for a federated SaaS application? So we have had a legacy solution in place to solve this exact problem, I think for the years even before SCIM was introduced. So this legacy solution is based on the concept of LDAP groups. So all of the users with a common set of entitlements are assigned to a group, one single LDAP group. Let's say users with administrator privileges are all put into a group called as the administrator group, and all others with certificate management privileges are put into another group called as the certificate managers group, and so on. So this group information as well as the group membership information is exchanged between the business unit and the respective SaaS provider through periodically scheduled batch jobs. So now you might know why I call this legacy solution. So it was still using the batch jobs that could synchronize the data between the SaaS provider and the enterprise side. So even with the solution, the identity provider would provide the single sign-on for the users. So a SAML assertion would be generated for the authenticated user and then redirected to the SaaS provider side along with the SAML assertion. So when the user actually ends up on the vendor side, they would check the group membership of the the group membership information of the user, which was previously obtained by the synchronized batch jobs that were running, and then checks if the user is part of the appropriate groups to make a decision if the user must be allowed access or not. So this is what the high-level architecture of the legacy solution would look like. As you can see, there is a data store that stores all of the group membership information for the users, and there's a periodic batch job that runs that can synchronize this information with the external service provider. So the end user now interacts with the identity provider for authentication. So they go through the single sign-on process and a SAML assertion is generated, and for the authenticated user is then redirected to the service provider. The service provider then verifies the group membership information, as I explained before, which is previously obtained from the batch jobs, and then makes a decision if the user must be allowed access or not. So this legacy solution comes with many disadvantages. One of them being the access management is completely delegated to the vendor side. So now the enterprise has no control over the process. It is not possible for the enterprise to put in any controls that it feels is necessary to make the process more efficient, more effective. The enterprise has to blindly trust and hope that the service provider does everything that is needed for them. Also, there is a very high possibility of stale entitlement data here. For example, let's assume there's a user Bob who is part of the cloud security team, and he has the administrative privileges on a certain SaaS application, so is made part of the groups like the administrator group. And this information is synchronized onto the service provider side through the batch job, that runs on the first Friday of every month. But during the second week, let's say Bob changes his teams, now is no longer part of the cloud security team, and hence he does not have to have the administrative privileges anymore, so is removed from the administrator group on the enterprise side. But however, this updated group membership information is not propagated yet to the service provider side, because the batch job runs only once a month on the first Friday of every month, and they have to wait until the next month for it to be propagated onto the service provider side. So now there is still entitlement data on the SaaS provider side, and hence Bob can still enjoy the administrative privileges that he previously had, though ideally he should not be, which can lead to very high risks. Also, this group-based approach is not very scalable for the fine-grained access management, because if we have to cater to fine-grained access privileges, then we'll end up creating number of LDAP groups, and that can be a maintenance nightmare for an enterprise of our size. So it's not really scalable. Another major disadvantage, I would say, another major practical disadvantage I would say we had with this solution was inconsistent error messages. All of these error messages were displayed when the user did not have authorization, and it must have straight away said, you're not authorized to access the application, you don't have the suitable access rights. But instead, now one of the vendor on, as you can see on the right top corner, it says that the credentials you entered is invalid. There's another one saying the SAML assertion itself is invalid. There is even another one saying there was an exception encountered during the processing of the request, and so on. Since this access management process is offloaded to the vendors have the liberty to use any text that they want in these error messages, which is not consistent across all the providers, and it does not give a smooth user experience for the business users. In fact, they do not know what exactly is causing the problem. Who should they reach out to solve this problem? So there is no particular process to follow in order to overcome the problems that they face during the authorization errors. Also, these errors are not very helpful for troubleshooting sessions as well. Let's say the business users reach out either to the support team on the SaaS provider side or to the support team on the enterprise side itself. These messages do not really help either of them, and it only adds overhead to the whole support process that's involved in the chain. So we have had this legacy solution for years now, and somehow we have lived through all of these disadvantages that's associated with it. However, in the past year, there have been some business drivers that have pushed for the need for a new solution to be put in place. So one of them being the increasing SaaS partnerships. Like I said, we have been adding more than 10 new partnerships every month, and we are catering to an exponentially growing user base. So it becomes very necessary to have an efficient and reliable access management solution in place when we are catering to such a large user base. Also, we need real-time authorization when we are dealing with large number of users, so the users can be provisioned and deprovisioned with entitlements in real time. Also, with this legacy solution, even if the user was unauthorized, he was authenticated and redirected to the vendor side with all of the attributes that are included in the SAML assertion. Then the vendor checks that, oh, he's not part of the suitable groups and hence he must be denied access. So even for unauthorized users, there is this information within the SAML assertion that's unnecessarily being disclosed with the external SaaS providers, which is not very desirable. Also, since the SaaS providers control the access management process, it's not possible for the enterprise to put in the controls that it needs in order to enable auditing and to perform the accountability of the whole process. So these were the major business drivers that encouraged us to find a better solution. So thus began our research for a new and efficient solution that can overcome all of the disadvantages and the inconveniences that can be caused by this legacy solution. So one alternate solution that could maybe solve this problem was including this group information in the SAML assertion itself, right? So this can overcome the risks of having the stale entitlement data, because whenever the user is either added to a new group or removed from a group, the updated group membership information is immediately reflected within the information contained in the SAML assertion. So then the vendor can take informed decision about these changes. But however, the other disadvantages that were associated with the legacy solution is still inherited by the solution, because access management is still done by the vendors. So enterprise has no control. And even this approach is based on the concept of groups. So it's not really scalable for fine-grained access management. So finally, we found a solution that we thought could overcome all of these disadvantages. And that was having a centralized system that could store all of the entitlements associated with the SaaS applications for all of our workforce. So this centralized system provides real-time APIs that can be used to provision or deprovision the entitlements for the users on demand. Also, it enables to have just-in-time access because there are self-service tools built around these APIs, and the users can just go ahead and request the access whenever they need to, and upon proper approval process through the business owners, they can have the access approved in just no time. Also, it actually enables the enterprise to enforce the principle of just enough access, because they can put in all of the necessary controls that they need is important to ensure that the users have the least privilege that they need in order to carry out the tasks. So this is an high-level design of the solution that we have in place. As I said, there is an entitlement store that stores all of the entitlements that the users have for different SaaS applications. And this side of the design process shows here a plugin that we developed and deployed on our Ping Federate identity provider, thanks to the Ping Federate SDK that helps us to extend all of the data store capabilities. So this plugin consists of different modules. There is one module that helps us to set up the connection and fine-tune the configuration parameters before making calls to this entitlement store. There's a module to generate the payloads. As you can see, we need to pass different parameters in a particular way to call out these entitlement store APIs before we can provision or deprovision the entitlements, and generate payloads module helps us with that. So all of these SaaS applications are associated with a unique ID in our firm's enterprise setting. So that is the app ID that's referred to there. You provide an app ID and you get back the environment name, and then you use the user ID and the environment name itself to fetch all the entitlements that the user is associated for that particular application for. So the response parser is used to parse the useful data out of the API outputs, and then there is a decision logic that actually takes a binary decision whether the user must be allowed access or not. So we did this project the agile way. So the first iteration of this was a plugin that makes a binary decision saying yes, the user must be allowed access, and no, the user must be not allowed access. So we plan to target the fine-grained entitlements in the next iteration of this project, depending upon how far the business owners adopt the solution and how much effort should be actually put into this. So that iteration of the plugin can cater to even the fine-grained access management. So this is what a high-level architecture of this new solution looks like. As you can see, there is an entitlement store within the enterprise network that can provide all the access management decisions for the users. So the end user only interacts with the identity provider for authentication. The identity provider then consults the entitlement store APIs to make an authorization decision. If the user is denied access, then the transaction is aborted immediately. The user is not even sent to the service provider side. So there's a closed loop in the process here. If the user is not authorized, then stop them then and there. If the user is authorized, then a SAML assertion is generated for the user, and they're redirected to the service provider side with the SAML attributes and all that stuff. So this is what the workflow would look like. As I said, the end user requests access to an external SaaS application. The SaaS vendor discovers that the user is not authenticated yet, and then they're redirected to the enterprise's identity provider for authentication. And then the identity provider challenges the user either with single factor or multi-factor authentication, depending upon the sensitivity of those SaaS applications. And also, the identity provider makes this one extra call to the centralized entitlement store to figure out if the user is authorized or not. So based upon that authorization decision, if the identity provider decided that the user must not be allowed to access this application, then the transaction is aborted, then an error page with a meaningful error message is displayed saying, you're not authorized to access this application, go to this place to request for entitlements, or if you still see this problem, then go to operations team or whatever. So the user can actually make sense of what is happening, what exactly is causing the error that he's seeing. If the user is, if at all is authorized to access the application, then a SAML assertion is generated, and then the user is redirected to the service provider side with the SAML assertion. So these are all the advantages that we think that the new solution can provide. As I said, it provides just-in-time provisioning because there are real-time APIs now, and the users can request for access whenever they think they need to. And there is just enough access. As I said, all of the access management process now happens on the enterprise side. So there is full control for the enterprise, and they can put in any controls that they feel is necessary to make sure that the user only gets the privileges that they want in order to complete the necessary tasks. They can also put in audit controls, and now there is a better way to track the accountability of the whole process. And as you can see, the screenshot shows one consistent error message that is displayed. So whenever there's an authorization error, there's a link that they need to go to in order to request access for that application. And if they still see the problem, then they can contact the operations team or whatever, right? So now there is no need to involve the vendor side in any unnecessary troubleshooting sessions. So this keeps the whole conversation and the partnership with the SaaS vendors simple and hassle-free. So this solution provided all of the things that we thought were required to overcome the disadvantages of the legacy solution. However, we had certain challenges along the way. This was a cross-functional team effort because I work for the identity and authentication team and not the authorization team. So in our organization, the access management is handled by a completely different team. So to get the goals of both the teams aligned and to have a project plan in place was a tedious task. Also, since there were two different teams now, two different support teams had to be involved as well. So a support model had to be established before we could roll out this solution. And when we actually put this project plan together, the business owners seemed very enthusiastic and all in about it. But when the time actually came to adopt the application, they were not, I would say they were hesitant about adopting it because they had a smooth solution already functioning in place. They had something that did not require any effort from them. They did not want to disrupt a smooth existing connection is what I would say. So it took us long meetings and convincing before we got them on board to try out this new solution and all the benefits that it can provide. So I think these are all the disadvantages that's associated with rolling out any new solution in a large enterprise setting. So yes. So as I said, although there is a standard in place, it all depends on the adoption of the standard for us to reap the benefits of such standards. So I would say we push the SaaS applications to adopting them, but till then, this intermediate solution provides us everything we needed. Yeah, thank you. Sure.
On the SP side, what if your entitlements are more stringent than theirs? Don't you have to agree with them as well?
You're saying the service providers' entitlements are more stringent?
No, you send it through that filter to check his entitlements on the IDP side.
Yes.
So once you says he's okay, then you create the assertion and send it to the SP. Don't those entitlements have to also agree with the SP because since they're the service provider and you're granting them access, or they just trust what you're doing?
I think it's more up to the business owners to decide the entitlements rather than the service provider. So the business owners are usually the decision makers when it comes to entitlements. They decide what their business teams can and cannot do on the application and not the service provider itself.
Right.
So
Okay.
the decision makers lie on the enterprise side and not on the...
How are you modeling or storing the actual authorization rules? Is it some sort of like query logic or something like that, or is it just like, I don't know?
It provides a JSON output for us. As I said, I work on the SAML infrastructure side of it, but I know the superficial details of the entitlement implementation itself. So it's APIs which provides, it's an SQL database, I think. So that provides the output of the entitlements in the JSON format. So yeah.
Gentleman behind you, then we'll get you.
So you mentioned that you actually sending the entitlements to the once the authenticate through SAML, right? So the question is, how is that interpreted on the application side? The application should be able to support that, right? Because most of the application might not support listening to SAML entitlement through SAML. It all depends on the vendor, so isn't it? Or
yes, as I
maybe I'm
said,
missing
the
something.
first iteration of this, we are just concerned with the coarse-grained entitlements. So we are not actually passing the entitlement information for now. We are just, if the user is authorized, SAMLization is sent with the necessary attributes. It doesn't actually include the entitlement information. In the next iteration, we are targeting the fine-grained entitlements, where if the user is authorized, the entitlement information is sent to the service provider side. So we haven't yet gotten to that stage where we have to get in discussion with the service provider to understand what kind of entitlements they do support, they do not support.
Right, because they have to also implement something on their end to
Yes,
actually understand.
because right now they actually have some policies on their side where they compare the group membership information. I think it doesn't matter to them where exactly the group membership information comes from, right? So either it can be from the SAMLization or a bad job.
So right now you're passing groups to them in the SAML, or nothing?
Not
Just
through the
saying yes or
SAML,
no?
through the bad job.
Okay. So once you authenticate and you send the entitlements, also isn't there a limitation on how much data you can send? For example, users part of 300 entitlements. So the amount of data that you can send through SAML, there's a limitation on that too.
Yes.
So how do you handle that?
We don't actually send all of the groups. We usually use a fixed string. Like, let's say there is a business team called as cloud security. We usually ask them to have a fixed prefix that starts with cloud. So if the user is accessing a certain application, all of the only groups that begin with a fixed string, like cloud, are sent over. So it's usually limited to like 8 to 10 groups, and that's how we manage it for now. Yes, we are using Ognal on the Ping side.
I think you kind of a similar question. I was going to ask you how this was going to work for fine-grained entitlements. The answer is you haven't done that yet.
Yes,
So fair enough.
That's our next
But
iteration.
I guess anticipating that, have you thought about how mechanics of how you pass this information through? Have you identified a suitable SAML attribute you might use to pass the group membership information through, or is that all future work?
We don't want to actually pass the group membership information. We want to actually pass the entitlements. Like we have prior agreement with the service provider saying, let's say if the permission says read, is allowed to perform these many actions. So an opaque string is mapped to a set of privileges on the service provider side. So we would say permissions, and then the SAML attribute would actually contain read, write, whatever, and that is mapped to certain privileges on the service provider side.
That
So it
makes
would
sense.
require prior partnerships with the SPs in order
And
to.
you think that there will be a per partner agreement on which attribute to use, or
Yes.
okay,
We hope to maintain a standard, but I think there are going to be edge cases where we are going to have to cater to the customized use cases as well.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
So it was kind of like on similar lines which they ask basically. So any kind of like deep linking this that. So all these partners, if they make any changes to their site or entitlements, they'll have to first work with your teams to make sure that everything is in sync.
Yes, that will be needed. Yes. Yes. I think maintaining that partnership is more important to us than them than us. So I think they would take the extra steps to make sure that we are not pissed off with them. So yeah. I would say majority of our applications even do not deal with fine-grained access management because they are pertain to a particular business team and all of them have a common set of privileges. So only there's a small set of applications that actually need fine-grained access. So that's why we waited till the next cycle to implement that part of the process. So I think we cater to majority of them through what we have right now in place.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Namitha.
Thank you.